Our lesson today actually is from the book of Esther, chapter 7, verses 1 through 10. I'm going to do it a little bit differently. I think what I want to do is to sort of gives us a little background and then sort of a synopsis of the story. And you'll see why as I go through. So many times when I read the Old Testament stories, I get lost in the story because they are so engaging. I root for the good guys and love to see the bad guys get what's coming to them. The book of Esther is one of those stories. It has intrigue, danger, and deliverance, all in 10 short chapters. But what is the message of this book that never mentions God to us? The people of God. That's us. What I see in this story is the providence of God. So what I would like you to do as I go through this synopsis of the story is think about the times that people are in the right place at the right time. The book of Esther happened during the reign of Xerxes. He had inherited the Persian kingdom from his father, Darius the Great, in 486 BC. Xerxes reigned until 464 BC. Both father and son tried to conquer Greece, and both failed. According to the Ancient History Encyclopedia, Xerxes assembled a force of 2 million men and 4,000 ships for his invasion, which occurred in 480 BC. Esther and her cousin Mordecai had adopted Esther after her parents had died, were part of a Jewish community that remained in Persia 52 years after Darius' decree in 538 BC, allowing the Jewish people to return to their lands. Esther's story begins with Xerxes in the 3rd year of his reign. He's throwing a banquet for all his government officials that lasted for 7 days. Officials and nobles had come from every part of the empire, as well as the capital city of Susa. After the feasting, he displayed all his wealth and power for another 180 days, 6 months, at the end of which he held another 7-day banquet for his officials. His queen Vashti was banqueting at the same time with the ladies. On the 7th day of the banquet, when Xerxes was glad with wine, I think maybe he was a little high, he ordered Vashti to come to him. He apparently wanted to show her off to all his officials. She refused, which was not a good idea. She was the queen, but he was an absolute ruler. Her refusal could not be tolerated. The king divorced her. And after some time, when he had calmed down, his advisors recommended holding a type of beauty contest to replace Queen Vashti. They rounded up all the beautiful virgins from every province and brought them to the harem in Susa. Esther, who was taken as part of the roundup, found favor with the eunuch who was in charge of the harem. He assigned her 7 young ladies as attendants and moved her to the best place in the harem. We know from scripture that Mordecai had admonished Esther not to reveal her nationality during this process. We could speculate that Mordecai knew that the Jewish people had enemies in high places. When Esther was presented to the king, she stood out above all the other girls and won his favor. So he declared Esther his queen. Mordecai, who sits at the gate of the king, as people come in and out, overhears a plot by some of the guards to kill Xerxes. and he sends warning to Xerxes through Esther, the queen. The plot is confirmed and the conspirators are killed. But nothing was done at that time to reward Mordecai. Later, the king had a sleepless night and called for the annals of the king to be read to him. During this reading, he discovers that nothing was done for Mordecai and sets his mind to remedy that situation. Now enters the antagonist, Haman. I want to give you a little side note. When Mary and I were in Israel, the time of Purim, which is this story, what this story is about, is a time when the story of Esther is read in the Jewish congregations. And when they read this story, they intentionally try to cover up the name of the hated Haman. So while we were there, we saw them running around the streets with all of these little noisemakers, including little hammers that you hit people with over the head or shoulder or whatever that made a noise. So whenever the story is read, of course, everybody knows the story. So when Haman's name is coming up, they start beating on things and making noise and hitting each other with these noisemakers and going crazy, just to cover up that name. So, with that being said, King Xerxes had just promoted Haman above all the other nobles. When he comes in or goes out of the king's gate, everyone honors him and bows to him, except Mordecai. The royal officials at the gate talk with Mordecai day after day. He tells them that he's a Jew, which means he's not going to do it. He will not bow. So the officials told Haman to see if his behavior would be tolerated. One day when Haman comes into Xerxes' presence, he asks Haman what should be done for a man who saves the king's life. Haman, as self-centered as he is, thinks the king is talking about him. He describes what honor should be done. Then Xerxes orders Haman to do all he has said from Mordecai, the very man who would not bow to him. Humiliation, having to do for the very man that would not honor or bow to him. Haman, in a rage, devises a scheme to not only kill Mordecai, but all the Jews. He presents his scheme to the king as a necessity to rid the kingdom of a people whose customs are different and don't obey the king's laws. He never mentions the nationality and has no idea that Queen Esther is a Jew. Haman had cast the lot. The word is pur, so that's where we get the idea of Purim, throwing the lots. So he cast the lot to find out when this should happen. And he does this in the first month of the year. So the date then is set for the 13th day of the 12th month, an entire year of 11 months away. In our day of doing this and instant communication, we forget how long it took to transcribe the orders into all the languages of the empire, then for swift riders to reach the various governments and nobles scattered throughout the empire. It's at this point where we join today's story. Mordecai becomes aware of the order and asks for Esther to help save her people. Her response is that she hasn't seen the king in 30 days. And it's against the law for anyone to approach the king in the inner court without having been summoned. The punishment for doing this is death, unless the king holds out his scepter. Mordecai speaks his faith concerning deliverance. If Esther refuses, then some other way will be raised up. For me, the central statement is in verse 14. And who knows but that you have come to royal position for such a time as this. She asked for the whole community to fast and pray for her and with her for 3 days before she approaches the king. Esther has her own bit of intrigue. She invites only the king and Haman to a banquet. First day comes, king says, "What do you want?" And she says, "Come tomorrow." I say, "Okay." And on the second day, she, in our colloquialism, drops the hammer. She asks for her own life and for the life of her people. At this point, Haman knows he is done for. Haman winds up being hanged on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. The Jews are given the right to defend themselves and are saved. Mordecai actually becomes the second in command to Xerxes. So we see promotion all around. But why have this story in the Bible at all? There's no mention of God in it. Not even when Mordecai talks of deliverance coming from some other way than Esther. To me, this is a story of God's providence towards his people. How do we understand providence? R.C. Sproul, in his article, "What is Providence?" helped me to understand God's providence more clearly. Our closest word in English is provide. One way of understanding it is a father or mother sees what the family needs and they make sure that it's on hand when it is needed. In other words, you look forward and see a need and make sure that that need is, whatever is needed is there. You need milk, you go to the store and buy it before you're out of milk, kind of a thing. It's not just a foreknowledge. You know, we talk about God's foreknowledge of things to come and his omniscience, but this goes just a little further. Providence not only knows, but it makes sure that what is needed is there when it's needed. So when we look at our story, the idea that Mordecai and Esther are in Persia, in the capital city of Susa, at the time that they're needed for a deliverance for their people. Esther's favor with the eunuch, her favor with the king, and having been named queen. Mordecai overhearing the plot to kill the king. Things that by themselves we wouldn't think a whole lot about. But we see it as we look to see God's provision during this time. If you look through the rest of the Bible, you see several other instances. Sproul's article points out that the first time the word providence is used in the Bible is when Abraham is going to offer up Isaac on the altar. Isaac points out to Abraham that they have wood and they have fire, but no lamb for the sacrifice. And Abraham says, God will provide for himself a sacrifice. And of course, the lamb is caught in the bushes at the end for that story. The scripture is full of God's provision for his people. Sending Joseph ahead to Egypt so that Israel would have food and safety in Egypt when they were starving in Palestine. Judges, when the people sinned and needed deliverance from those who were oppressing them. And all of us, when we couldn't deliver ourselves, God sent Jesus for us to provide salvation for us. We take courage and comfort in knowing that God is always looking out for us. The idea being he is for us, not against us. In times of trouble, we quote Romans 8, assuring ourselves that God is for us. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. And then in verse 31, what then shall we say in response to this? If God is for us, who can be against us? What comfort we can take in this knowledge during this time. God has not been surprised. God is for us. He has made provision for us during this time when everything is in turmoil. I found a surprise in Sproul's article. He says in the article that the word providence in Latin is made up of two parts, a prefix and a root word. The root word is videre or videre, or however you want to say it, V-I-D-E-R-E, which means to see. And the surprise, our word for video comes from this word. So here we sit, having Sunday school class with video and audio, and surely to goodness, this is God's provision for this time. When I saw this, I about came out of my skin. Isaiah says, surely the arm of the Lord is not too short to save, nor his ear too dull to hear. Continue to pray for our pastors and leaders as they may know the direction of God. Pray for each other that we may continue to reach out to those around us and be the church, the people of God.